Stop, they found a 1940s city under the ice, and it's not ours. Look, I'm gonna tell you something I probably shouldn't. They cut into Arctic ice and found a corridor that breathed heat. No tracks in, no tracks out. Just a locked hex gate and air that tasted like hot metal. The floor vibrated, but nothing moved. The file they stamped it with said Iron Vault, 1940s, sealed, joint custody. 5 flags agreed to stay away and never say why. Trust me, you're not ready, because this wasn't a bunker. It looked like a city plan, only nobody human built for bodies like ours. What I won't show you yet is the one test that made the ice ripple. Stay with me. Are you sitting down? Because once you see this, there's no going back. Here, that's how we're doing this, 3 pillars before the one clip I'm holding back. First, the discovery in the 1940s. A melt shaft punching into warm air where there shouldn't be any, a camera dangling on a wire, and ribbed walls that looked machined, not carved by ice or rock. Field techs ran spark tests against wartime alloy catalogs, tungsten carbide, high-speed steels, high-nickel, moly blends, and none of it lined up. Thermal drilling existed then, crude, yes, but real. That's how they got eyes on it. Second, the Iron Vault Treaty. Not public, not the Antarctic treaty you can Google from 1959. Quieter, non-occupation, non-navigation, non-drilling. A rectangle drawn into silence. The cover story, magnetic hazard, flight safety, ice dynamics. Years later you see the fingerprint near Jeannette Island, persistent map blur, missing satellite tiles right where compasses went soft on wartime convoys. That blur is real. Go look. Third, today's breach. Melting in the 2010s and 2020s peeled back the skin. Drones caught heat plumes and steam fog, then their posts vanished. A research buoy drifted inside and streamed a low hum in bands that match published subglacial spectra. And while that cracked open, 2025 Dotson Ice Shelf headlines talked about engineered lanes beneath Antarctic ice. Geometry that rhymes with what was seen up north decades earlier. All 3 point at the same thing, a corridor grid around a warm core that behaves like an engine bay. No doors, just pressure edges that open on presence. Floors that swallow sound. Walls that shed frost. The question over every scene is simple: who built it, and why guard it with silence instead of flags? The stakes aren't abstract. Shipping routes, resource control, military red lines. If the treaty collapses, the first drill wins and everyone else pays. This rabbit hole goes deeper than a lost base or a Cold War trick. To understand why, we rewind to the first footprint that didn't fit. First glimpses under ice. 3 winters into the 1940s, storm hunters were flying blind across a white ceiling. Weather mattered more than anything then. Convoys lived or died by a day's forecast, so polar flights kept pushing farther, chasing better data. One crew watched their instruments go lazy over a stretch that should have been dull. The air temp was steady, but their belly thermometer ticked up a hair. Ice was ice. It shouldn't breathe heat. Down below, a ship slid along pack ice and dragged a crude sonar. The paper trace picked up a streak, too clean, too smooth, bending in a perfect arc. No sediment drift, no boulder signatures, just a line like a rail in the dark. They chalked it up to a glitch. Meanwhile, a bored radio operator scratched a note in a margin. Hum under Aurora. He got told it was sky crackle. Years later, the waveform he drew would look an awful lot like modern subglacial hum spectra. Convoys started reporting something else. Compasses yawning, a loose-jawed swing near a box that didn't make sense on any naval chart. The box's edges would later overlap the weird blur on maps around Jeannette Island, but nobody knew that yet. One pilot cut lower on a clear day and saw it, a darker ring inside a white field. Not a melt pond, too sharp, too round. He didn't file it. He told a friend over coffee and then didn't talk about it again. While that was happening in the sky, survey teams on the ice were drilling for cores. Thermal drills were a wartime hack, coils and power packs built to cut time, because diesel rigs were heavy and loud. The tech was crude, but it worked. When you're racing weather, you use what you have. Most holes came up cold and boring, layers like tree rings, a little dust, a bug or two. Then a borehole hit taste you can't explain: air. Steam peeled up in sub-zero wind. The temp climbed fast enough to frost a man's eyebrows from the inside out. Look, I'm gonna tell you something that only makes sense in hindsight. Thermal drills were real by the 1940s, heated coils, field-rigged, so a melt shaft wasn't magic, just guts and wire. The drill team thought they'd hit a brine pocket or a geothermal seam. They dropped a camera on a wire. The feed jittered, rolled, and then stabilized on a curve that wasn't ice. The wall had ribs, regular, repeating like a bellows frozen mid-breath. The curve was too true. Ice carves itself into chaos. This had a plan. They hauled the rig up, ran another pass, then sent down a sampler. The tray came back with shavings that flashed dull gray, not the bright bite of steel. The field tech flipped through his pocket cards, tungsten carbide reference, high nickel listings, moly blends. The weight was wrong. The spark was wrong. It skated past the rows he knew. He wrote unknown alloy non-cataloged because that's the only sentence he could defend. Unknown to them across town, 1,000 miles and a few governments away, another set of sonar sheets was getting weird. Perfect arcs showed up again. The guy reading them had built his career on rocks, not rails. He circled the lines, pinned them to a cork board, and left the room. Coming back didn't help. The plane that had seen the dark ring made one more pass, stupid low. He caught a rim like a lip. Then turbulence shoved him and it was gone. He swore off it. Then he drew it in his log anyway, and on the line below he wrote, "Keep out." That phrase would come back later on signs that said magnetic hazard and flight safety and nothing else. Meanwhile, the hum kept showing up when nobody asked for it. Radio guys penciled it under Aurora and moved on. But at night, standing on the ice, men felt a thrum under their boots like a ship engine you couldn't see. They joked about ghosts. One man took off his glove and put his palm down flat. He swore the vibration was there and wouldn't let his hand agree. This was the moment everything changed, and nobody recognized it yet. Small notes piled up in drawers that didn't talk to each other. Arc lines on sonar. Lazy compasses. A ring inside a white field. A hot breath from a hole. A smear of metal that didn't match any book. Get this, they almost walked away. The weather flipped, a storm boxed them in, and the drill crew started packing to bug out. Then someone leaned over the shaft and heard air moving, not up, not down, sideways. That made no sense. Air under ice runs vertical, follows cracks. This was lateral, like a corridor pulling its own draft. While that was happening on the ground, a naval officer tracking convoy losses circled the same blank grid on his map and made a note to reroute ships 100 miles wide of it. He didn't say why. "Compass reliability degraded," he wrote. That phrase would cover a lot for the next 20 years. Now remember, this is the 1940s, so every oddity fought a war to be believed. People had reasons to ignore weird. They were busy not dying. But the pile got too high. A thermal drill cut too close to something warm. A camera saw ribs that weren't natural. A sample tray held a metal that behaved wrong. A radio picked up a hum that wouldn't fit in a category. And a pilot stared into a ring that shouldn't have been there, then blinked and lost it. Here's where it gets crazy. They went back with a boot team. Ropes, lamps, masks. They clipped in and stepped onto a floor that ate sound, like walking on thick felt, only it flexed and settled under weight. The air was 40 degrees warmer than it should have been. Their lamps bounced off walls with a skin, not ice, not rock, something that shed frost as fast as it formed. The corridor ran straight as a shot and then turned in a perfect hex. At the end sat a gate with no hinges, no handle, no tool marks, just edges that met so tight the lamp glare died there. They stood quiet and swore they felt the floor breathe once, like a sleeping animal shifting. Then the hum rose a hair and the rope man pulled and they left. Word started to leak upward, not to newspapers, not to scientists' desks, but to rooms with carpets and ashtrays and men who made rules when things didn't fit. Someone wrote 2 words at the top of a fresh folder, "Iron Vault," and the door to that room closed. Inciting incident, the melt shaft. False ending Q1 in minutes. After this section, we'll be told the box is empty and the hazard is routine. It won't hold. They set the winch over the mouth and fed the cable by gloved hand, 1 mark at a time. The camera was a steel can with a glass eye and a stubborn coil light, nothing fancy. It swung, knocked a rim, and dropped into warm breath. The lens fogged, then cleared, and the picture steadied on a wall that shouldn't exist. Ribs again, regular spacing, gentle camber. The operator muttered, adjusted focus, and the ribs flowed like they'd been pulled in one pass. No trapped bubbles, no grain. Just a surface that drank condensation and shed it in beads that ran uphill. Steam ghosted out around their boots, catching sun and vanishing. It was 20 below on the ice and their faces were wet. The gauge on the cable head ticked pressure sideways, not down. The man with the clipboard wrote that twice, then underlined it. They lowered another 10 feet. The curve widened to a corridor, ceiling arced, floor set flat, lines true. They killed the light. For a second, the frame went black. Then a faint glow lived in the ribs, not steady, more like the last breath of a banked ember. They pulled the camera and swapped to a sampler. A hollow bit kissed the edge and came back with curls that looked like metal but didn't feel right. Dense, cold, even warm, no bite when scraped with a file. The sparks, when they tried to strike, were wrong, short, dull, almost no star burst. The field metallurgist took one look and swore. He had a pocket booklet with wartime alloys, weights, sparks, grain. It didn't land anywhere. He wrote unknown, non-catalogued again, then added, "Conducts resists abrasion, heat tolerant." Boots went on a line. They pegged anchors, belayed, checked masks. The first man dropped through the shaft and swung into the passage, Boots meeting a floor that flexed and then forgot he was there. Sound died as if the corridor had swallowed it. Even their breath sounded small. The temperature hit like stepping off a plane in summer. Frost fled their sleeves. Someone laughed once, a nervous bark, and the echo came back folded and late, like the room didn't agree with straight lines of sound. They moved slow. The walls were close but not tight. Every surface looked machined without marks. No chatter, no bites, no seams. The lamps laid glare down and the glare just failed at the joints like the edges didn't reflect. They found no bolts, no weld bloom, no rivet heads, nothing to date or place it. The corridor ran to a turn and the geometry did something unfriendly to their balance. Curves met in hex angles that read right to the eye and wrong to the inner ear. At the turn, the air shifted. Still no breeze, but a sense that the room had direction. Ahead, the floor widened into a landing, and there it was, the gate. 6 edges kissing, no hinge, no bar, no scuff where a hand would go. If you've worked doors your whole life, you'd say this was pressure fit, but there was no give line, no pinholes. The seam was so tight it ate the light. One man, a machinist before the war, touched it with his glove and hissed. Warm, not hot. He pressed harder. The glove stuck a second, then came free, perfectly dry. They tried the gentle things first. A tap with a rubber mallet. Nothing. A broader press like a vault open you'd see in a bank. Nothing. They listened. The hum lived down in the bones, soft as a cat's purr through a wall. It rose when they crowded, fell when they backed away. That got into their heads. They spaced out, counted 10, stepped in together. The hum climbed a notch and the floor under them took a breath. No visual change, just a spreading like a mattress sighing under a new weight. Here's where the line between brave and stupid got thin. The lead clipped his rope to a piton and leaned his shoulder into the seam, feeling for any give. The second man swept the lamp left and right, looking for symbols, fasteners, anything. The beam caught marks finally, tiny, repeating notches along the ribs at hip height. Not letters, not numbers, a pattern you'd feel more than read. He traced 3 in sequence and the hum shifted again, the pitch bending like glass under heat. They backed off. The rope man tugged once, a plan to leave before their courage ran out. The lead raised a hand. He took off one glove, shook it once, and pressed the bare pads of his fingers to the joint. Later, he'd say it felt like pressing a spoon to the back of your teeth, hard, smooth, alive at its own frequency. He counted to 5. On 6, the seam ran a single dark pulse, not open, not even loose, just a proof that it wasn't dead. They almost stayed. That's the truth. Curiosity is a drug, but the air told a harder truth. Oxygen was dipping, not dangerously, but enough to make a thought come slow. The third man coughed and pointed to the gauge. They called it. On the way out, halfway up the shaft, the hum flattened and they all felt it, like the room took their pattern and filed it. Topside, they put the curls into glass, sealed, labeled. The metallurgist set a magnet on one and watched it refuse and then accept in a weird, delayed slide. He wrote it down and didn't guess why. They radioed a coded note with 6 words. Warm void, machined walls, sealed gate. That pulled attention like blood in water. The reply wasn't a reply. It was coordinates and orders. Hold, don't publish, expect visitors. By night, a small plane carved a line toward them. Not press, not science. Men with clearances and no insignia. They stepped onto the ice in coats that fit, took the notebook and asked questions that skipped over wonder and went straight to protocol. Who touched what? How long? What responded? The word ownership floated once, then got put away. One of them flipped the glass vials, checked the seals, and smiled without warmth. In the tent, they opened a new folder, blank tab, stiff paper. The man with the pen wrote Iron Vault at the top because he liked the weight of it. He drew a rectangle on a map and set his finger on the center. From here out, he said, this is not a place, it's a room we keep closed. The drill team sat, quiet, steam rising off their shoulders. Outside, the shaft breathed, steady as a sleeper. Inside, a name locked the door. Stakes defined the closed room. Morning came with men in good wool and bad moods. They didn't look at the ice, they looked at the folder. The tent heater clicked. The page with Iron Vault at the top sat between coffee rings. The first question wasn't what is it? It was who else knows. Because once a thing exists on paper, it can exist on a map, and maps start wars. The briefing broke along a clean fault. On one side, resource talk. If that warmth means power, if those alloys mean a factory, if the geometry hides a vein, then the first nation to plant a drill writes the next 50 years. On the other, the don't touch alarm. A system that changes pitch when you breathe on it isn't a mine. It's a sensor or a machine, and poking it could wake something we can't put back to sleep. Stakes got human fast. The drill boss had a kid in hospital down south. He wanted a bonus and a medal and to go home. The naval man drew lanes on a chart and saw convoys rerouted into teeth. The metallurgist couldn't stop thinking about a seam that drank light. And the suit with the pen thought about headlines and elections and the math of keeping a secret when 5 flags want a piece. They wrote the first rule while the coffee went cold. No flag, no claim, no maps. If you can't name it, you can't argue it on the floor of any chamber. The second rule, no approach without joint eyes. Nobody wants to wake up to find the other side already inside. The third rule, nothing moves the seam. Not by force, not by cleverness. Curiosity kills treaties faster than armies. A courier landed with a canvas pouch and a list of initials. Field notes and the curls in glass were stamped and routed to a joint desk no one would ever say out loud. They invented a cover story that could live in the open air. Magnetic hazard, unstable ice dynamics, flight safety. Signs would say what they always say when truth is inconvenient: keep out for your own good. The rumors started anyway. A city with no people, always warm, somewhere past the line where compasses lie. The phrase bled into sailors' talk and then into a footnote that sprouted on Arctic charts 2 winters later as magnetic anomaly notices near the Jeannette Island grid. The blur on the map would do the rest. People look away when a rectangle tells them to. In the closed room, someone slid a single photo across the table. Not a glamour shot. A sliver caught in a lamp flare, repeating marks along the rib line at hip height, too regular to be scratches, too alien to be letters. The linguist they dragged in on short notice stared, then shook his head. Not ours, he said, meaning no alphabet he knew. Not math I recognize either. The marks weren't for eyes. They were for hands or presence or time. What nobody knew at the time was how quickly a story like this can rot a chain of command. Pilot talk, text drink. A man in a bar tells a man on a ship that somewhere up north the ice sweats and the floor hums. That's how secrets slip, through humor first, then through doubt. The suits moved faster. They drafted a shape on a wall map, straight lines over a curved earth, a neat rectangle that ignored currents and common sense. Inside those lines, non-occupation, non-navigation, non-drilling. Outside those lines, patrols that miss, satellites that blur, overflights that file the wrong frames. They took a rubber stamp to the word empty. If you say hollow enough, people stop knocking. The pushback in the room sounded sane. If it's valuable, why refuse it? If it's dangerous, why not destroy it? The answer landed heavy. We don't know what we'd be destroying. Maybe a generator, maybe a vent, maybe a trigger with a long fuse. And if it is a generator and we break it, what happens to the ice above and the water under? Who pays when a shelf sags because we turned off the wrong thing? Meanwhile, someone kept glancing at the door. Because beyond treaties and hazard notices, there's the simple fact of greed. Corporate ears perk when government voices whisper. A quiet zone becomes a target painted in silence. The closed room needed a lock that wasn't just paper. They settled on a name that would live in margins, Iron Vault. Not because it was made of iron, they still didn't know what it was made of, but because a vault is a promise to stay shut. The last line on the page read like a prayer and a threat. No contact, no claim, no light. And beneath it, a smaller hand wrote what the room really feared, until we know what wakes it. The Iron Vault Treaty, how an empty zone was built. While the borehole cooled and the men thawed their fingers, another kind of drill started, suits flying by night to rooms with curtains drawn tight. Delegations met off-record, not at big conferences with flags, but in borrowed embassies and rail cars that never officially stopped. They didn't toast, they measured silence. The map on the table showed a neat rectangle traced over a sea of white that hides currents like wires, straight lines over a curved earth. From here to here, one said, doesn't exist. That's how they began. The language had to be careful. They couldn't say what was there without admitting it, so they wrote around the truth. Non-occupation, non-navigation, non-drilling. 3 no's that sound boring until you read them together. No one lives there, no one passes through, no one cuts down. You don't build a fence, you draw quiet. The template would look a lot like the Antarctic Treaty 10 years later, but this wasn't about science huts and penguins. This was about not waking a thing under ice that hummed when you breathed on it. Cover stories came next. Ice dynamics, magnetic hazard, flight safety. Perfect because they already had scraps to wave, lazy compasses on convoys, pilots seeing mirage rings, radio men logging aurora noise. Put a label on the fear and it looks like caution. Cartographers were told to resolve inconsistencies. That meant blur the tiles near the rectangle's corners, especially around that stubborn patch by Jeannette Island. If a square on the map stays fuzzy long enough, people stop asking it to sharpen. Enforcement had to look like incompetence. Patrols that miss. bombers training routes that arc just wide, weather stations that fail at the edge and don't get fixed. And when satellites finally came, pixels that smear or vanish, the way they sometimes do over bases and palaces. FOIA didn't exist yet, but the instinct did. Flood any request with paper until the time it takes to care runs out. They weren't naive. They baked in loopholes because they knew they'd need eyes. Scientific overflights with payloads that could plausibly be weather gear. Drifting buoys at the boundary that listen without admitting they do. Ice beacons that log temperature and quietly vibration. You can keep a room dark and still count the footsteps outside. One micro-story lives in a margin. A clerk with a steady hand copied the phrase non-navigation corridor into 5 languages. He'd never seen the ice. He thought he was fencing fog. 10 years later, he'd look up at a newsreel of the Antarctic Treaty and feel a strange echo. Same words, this time on camera, different ghost underneath. Meanwhile, something else was happening in Moscow and Washington and London and Oslo. The map square became a chessboard. The United States Navy plotted convoy lanes around a blank box that didn't have a name. Soviet trawlers pretended to fish at the margin and counted patrol cycles. Norway asked, softly, whether Svalbard precedent meant anything this far east. No one said Jeannette Island out loud. Someone always coughed when the pen drifted that way. This was the moment everything changed inside governments. A secret is easy when it's useless. This one had weight. Oil men started haunting hotel lobbies, buying drinks for meteorologists. Shipping insurers redlined a column of sea without printing why. A broker asked a quiet question. If the hazard is magnetic, why does it move with the seasons? The answer on a memo that was later burned read, because it isn't magnetic. You want a symbol for how the empty zone was built? Picture a pilot over the rectangle in the 1950s told to run a weather transect. He sees the altimeter misbehave, radios a garble, and lines up for a second pass. He's trained to ignore stories. Then the horizon ripples like heat above asphalt at 40 below. He clicks the camera. The frame comes back smeared, motion, glare, a strip of nothing. One angle holds clean. It shows a geometry that doesn't track wind. Hands it off and watches it vanish into a pouch. 3 weeks later, his squadron's route shifts. Flight safety, they say. He stops asking. Inside the closed rooms, lawyers worried about time. Treaties get brittle. People retire. Files drift. So they wrote a maintenance plan for silence. Renew by inertia. Tie the rectangle to existing hazard bulletins so reissuance feels routine. Update the blur when satellites get sharper. If challenged, cite ice instability and show crash reports with redacted names. The word secret never needs to be spoken if you keep saying risk. Someone raised the hard problem. What if a company drills anyway? The answer sounded simple and mean. Deny permits, pull insurance, seize cargo under maritime safety, and if they go black, sink the tender at night and blame weather. The room heard that and went quiet. This was supposed to be a lock, not a war, but locks attract thieves and thieves force hands. They left a pressure valve, joint inspections at the boundary during melt seasons, shared labs in neutral ports to study magnetic anomalies. Enough cooperation to keep the militaries from tripping over each other in the fog, and a hotline that rang in 3 capitals if any reading spiked, seismic, radio, or thermal. They knew from the hum night that spikes could happen when you touched the wrong thing. Better to have everyone hear it together than accuse one another of making it. Here's the part nobody likes to admit. The rectangle worked mostly. For a generation, ships bent around a spot that maps made ugly. Satellite eyes looked away. Overflights returned frames with missing lines. The quiet held because the ice helped, thick, stubborn, hiding the seams. And then the climate began to thin the lid, and sharp kids with drones and public datasets didn't grow up with the same fear of blank squares. The iron vault had been a promise. Promises age. But before the thaw and the leaks, there was craft. A zone made empty by agreement, enforced by boredom, justified by lies that were close enough to useful truths. A treaty you won't find in a library, written in the margins of several others. And if you stood on a harbor in the 1960s and traced your finger up past Jeannette Island and asked why the map buckled there, a tired man at a counter would slide you a pamphlet on magnetic storms and wish you a safe voyage. He'd practiced the line. He'd never flown over the seam. He didn't need to. The job was to keep that room closed. Anatomy of the find, what the site actually is. The more they mapped, the less cave made sense. And yes, Jeannette Island's modern blur is still there. The surface fingerprint matches the subsurface logic. The corridor wasn't a one-off. It was part of a grid that wrapped a warm core, like maintenance lanes built around an engine bay the size of a stadium. Every passage hit hex angles, then softened into arcs, then snapped back to hex, like the place had 2 languages, curves for stress, edges for control. From above, if you could have peeled the ice, it would have looked like a honeycomb drawn by a machinist. The floors weren't floors the way we build them. Panels floated on something you couldn't see, then settled when you stood, like a pressure mat that remembered you and stopped caring. Stomp and it ate the stomp. Drop a wrench and hear nothing. It wasn't magic. It was physics tuned past comfort. Sound went somewhere, got turned into heat or hush. The men started whispering without being told. And the walls listened, nothing stuck. Frost formed, yes, and then ran like water and vanished. Ice is stubborn. It clings. These surfaces shed it, beating and slipping along faint channels so fine you had to angle a lamp to even catch them. Anti-frost geometry, the metallurgist muttered, not sure if he just named a thing or invented a prayer. In winter outside, rime grew teeth. Inside, nothing gained purchase. The place kept itself clean the way lungs do. There were no doors, not like ours. No hinges, no latches, just edges where pressure met pressure. Seems that read your presence. The first team learned it by accident. Stand crowded and the hum climbs. Spread out and it drops. Step forward in rhythm and a seam warms, not open, just awake. They were being read, not admitted. Felt less like an entryway and more like a valve that only changed when conditions were right. Tool marks, none. No chatter lines, no milling swirls, no weld bloom. Every curve implied machining without showing its scars. The machinist in the crew kept running his light low, hunting for flaws to hate. He found a place where two ribs met wrong by a hair, then realized the wrong was an optical lie. The joint was torqued in a way that dumped stress somewhere his eye couldn't follow. "It's smarter than me," he said, and that shut him up for an hour. Here's the part that made the outside maps click. Waste heat vents weren't chimneys. They were long, narrow veins traveling outward until they kissed the underside of the pack. Up top, right over those lines, the sea had polygnaws, open water patches that shouldn't freeze even at hard winter. Mariners had noted some of them for years, calling them persistent. Now a line guy traced vent to polygnaw on a chart and went still. The pattern wasn't random, it was aligned. Heat left in ribbons and wrote its name on the surface. They found nodes, too, junction bulbs where 6 corridors met around a hollow. Not rooms exactly, more like couplers. In those bulbs, the pressure logic felt stronger. A man would step in and feel his chest light, like the room took a little of his weight, not a lot. Just enough to tell you the math here cared about forces we ignore. You deset a canteen down and it would drift a finger's width, as if the table had thoughts about where round things ought to sit. What nobody talked about the first week but everyone felt was the presence effect. The site didn't just measure, it adapted. A path that seemed reluctant on Monday felt smoother by Friday, as if the floor and your stride had come to terms. The gate seam near the first shaft stopped drinking lamp glare so completely. A faint halo began to live along its edge when the team lined up without speaking. It wasn't dramatic. That's what scared them. The thing behaved like a system closing error bars. A micro story. The radio man, the same one who drew hum squiggles under Aurora months earlier, took his headset down the shaft against orders. He listened, eyes shut. He said the low band wasn't one tone. It was a stack like harmonics, and 2 of them flexed when he tapped the wall at rib height. He tapped 3 times, soft, soft, hard. The second harmonic curved, a little dip and back. He didn't say this part loud. It felt like a nod. They pulled more samples, careful, always from the frost sheds and not the meat of the ribs. In a lab far south, a tech measured thermal conductivity that bounced between metal and ceramic rules. The density chart made a liar out of itself twice. Electric response lagged a breath, then overperformed. Nothing fit a catalog. The report wrote multi-phase composite engineered, then trailed off like the pen got shy. Composite of what? The shard wouldn't tell. Here S where the site's logic snapped into a picture. An intake cut they hadn't recognized revealed itself when meltwater surged in spring. A sloped tube, gentle grade, ribbed in a different way, broad teeth that would catch ice and work it without jamming. Sediment bands spiraled along the wall, sorted by size and weight, as if the tube wanted fines here, heavies there. Flow math, done on a chalkboard by a man with cold fingers, said this wasn't a creek trick. So call it what it was beginning to look centuries, like. Industrial, not days. Not a habitat, not a temple, centuries. Not a bunker, a process space. The grid fed the core. The core bled heat in lines that matched polygnaws the way veins match capillaries in a hand. The tubes took in the Arctic itself, ice, water, grit, and pushed it through a logic we hadn't seen before. Output? Unknown. But you could stand in a junction bulb, feel the pressure shape your breath, and know you weren't in a natural void. Doubt tried to live. Could glaciers fake geometry? Could basalt pipe tricks masquerade as design? The team brought in geologists who wanted to say yes. After a day inside, none of them would sign their name to the comfort. Basalt doesn't sort sand by density while it hums and reads your stance. Ice doesn't shed frost uphill. One last detail that changed their thinking. The marks along the ribs, the tactile script, if that's what it was, started to repeat on a longer loop. A tech with patience and tape chalked positions every 5 steps and realized the pattern echoed every 21 ribs, then nested again at a larger scale, a kind of rhythm inside rhythm. That's machine talk, not words, parameters. So what was the sight in plain speech? A built environment tuned to move energy, mass, and information through ice and ocean without freezing up, without wearing down. A thing that kept itself warm, quiet, and balanced by sensing anything that touched it and gently pushing back. Not ours. Not from any shop that filed weld notes in 1940s binders. It lived under a lid of winter, and it did a job. The job wasn't waiting for us. The job was ongoing. The humming night. They wanted a clean read, just numbers. So in the late 1950s, a probe team came back with fresh toys and bad confidence. New hydrophones, a narrowband pinger, a magnetometer tuned to pick up whispers. The plan sounded harmless. Ping the corridor wall, catch the echo, go home. No cuts. No prying, just a knock. They rigged the pinger in a node bulb where 6 lanes met. The radio man, same stubborn ears as before, set levels low and said, "Short pulse, 10 seconds apart." The first ping went soft into the ribs, a polite hello. The hum held steady, a low blanket. On the third pulse, something leaned back. The blanket wrinkled. Harmonics rose like a choir clearing throats. Topside, the ice answered. It didn't crack. It rippled. Imagine asphalt heat shimmer, except this was a frozen plain at night. Lamps threw long lines that started to snake. Seismometers drew waves that weren't quakes, broad, even miles wide, too shallow to be tectonic. The men on the surface felt it in their ankles first, a traveling looseness. Down in the bulb, compasses stopped pretending. Needles spun lazy circles, then snapped to a heading, then let go again. Radios went cotton-mouth, white hiss, then sudden clarity, as if a hand kept covering and uncovering a speaker. The pinger kept its metronome. The hum climbed in step, then overshot, then settled into a new key the gear didn't have a name for. Look, I'm gonna tell you something the report never wrote. They thought they'd broken it, not damaged, woken. The gate seemed near the first shaft showed a line they'd never seen, a faint bruise-color glow tracking the joint, moving like breath under skin. When 3 men, without thinking, stepped closer together, the glow sharpened. When they stepped apart, it dulled. That's not geology, that's memory. Meanwhile, the sky went loud. The aurora fattened and dropped curtains like stage drapes, bright enough to paint shadows. A pilot circling the box swore later the green had weight. His altimeter twitched. He clicked his mic and got silence, then a perfect return, then silence again. He turned wide because his stomach told him to. In the bulb, the radio man tilted his head. "Hear this," he said, tapping the wall at rib height. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The second harmonic dipped obediently like a knee. He stopped. The hum held its new shape, as if it had taken a copy of them and didn't need them there to keep humming. Decision time came fast and stupid. Do you keep pushing the pings and get the proof, or do you shut it down before you cross a line you can't redraw? The lead looked at the oxygen numbers, then at the seam glow, then at the probe clock. "Cut it," he said. The tech rolled the gain to 0. The pinger went mute. The hum didn't fall. It stayed high, like a room waiting to see what you do next. They packed to get out. That's when the sight showed teeth. The return path through the corridor had always felt neutral. Now the floor put a little bias under their boots, subtle as a moving walkway. They moved with it and shaved minutes. At the shaft, the glow at the seam brightened a fraction and died, like a nod goodbye that also said, "I filed you." Topside, the ripple ran its last ring and flattened to calm. Radios cleared. The pilots' instruments remembered who they were. Compasses found north again like it had only ever been one thing. The aurora thinned to its usual scarf. Back in the tent, they did what people do to make fear small. They graphed. The waveform they'd logged was a match with inhuman wobble to under-ice hum bands the Navy had started collecting in other latitudes. Only here the spike rode a ladder, 1, 2, 3 steps, then chose a landing and stayed put after the stimulus stopped. The word that scared the room wasn't intelligent, it was adaptive. Someone asked the question you can't unask. Did it learn us? The radio man shook his head. It learned something about how we stand and how we time, he said. Patterns, not names. That should have helped, it didn't. They sent a cable that night to the joint desk. No poetry, just posture. Unplanned resonance, transient surface deformation, instrument disruption, no structural breach. Recommend heightened exclusion. The reply came back colder. Suspend all active probing, treat site as responsive system, upgrade to containment posture. Containment of what no one wrote. This was the moment everything changed behind the curtain. They chose silence over study. Lock it down harder. fewer visits, longer gaps, sensors at the edge, not inside. If someone asked in a hearing, they'd say ice safety and storms. In the field, they shifted to a rule the machinist understood. If a part starts to remember you, stop touching it. A week later, a smaller team tried to walk in quiet and found the gate seem utterly still. No glow, no warmth rise when they gathered. They took that as a mercy. 2 days after they left, a buoy on the boundary logged a hum bend at the exact second 3 men in a far-off lab replayed the pinger pulse. The site didn't need them present to respond. It needed the pattern. The room heard that and went dim. The site remembered anyway. Reversals, Cold War games, and corporate eyes. While containment memos hardened, the world outside drew battle lines around a blank. The United States Navy pushed convoy arcs lower on charts, adding an invisible buffer you couldn't explain in a briefing. Soviet trawlers started fishing along the northern margin, nets down, antennas up, logging every skip in radio and every lazy compass. The box didn't have a name, so they gave it a ritual. Sail near, take notes, look bored. 3 days earlier, a State Department staffer had slid a hazard circular to a shipping insurer in London. Official language: magnetic disturbance, ice instability, flight safety. Unofficial read: don't go there. Brokers saw premiums jump along a single latitude band. A junior analyst noticed those rates hugged the grid that later overlapped the Jeannette Island blur. He asked why. He didn't get invited to the next meeting. Meanwhile, something else was happening in Houston boardrooms and Moscow ministries. Oil firms were charting the shelf edge with gravity and magnetics, whispering about thermal anomalies nobody could square with currents. A consultant, paid to say optimism, tapped a chart and said, "Heat here, stable year to year." He didn't know he'd just put his finger on a waste heat vein. He sold the slide twice anyway. A spy plane came back from a long, thin run over the high Arctic with a reel that told 2 stories. Most frames looked like smears, glare, motion, film, fog, easy to bin as trash. But one clean angle caught a ring in shadow, not water, not pressure ridge, a mouth with geometry. The analyst who found it had seen missile silos, dry docks, crater chains. He logged this as unknown engineered feature and filed it to a desk that ate reels and spat out silence. He made a copy. It cost him a transfer. The satellite age should have burned the fog away. Instead, pixels vanished right where the old hazard box lived. Early birds blamed orbit. New birds blamed clouds that never moved. Map services updated everywhere else, then cut to low-res blocks near that stubborn Jeannette Island patch as if the hand updating got tired. FOIA wars began, at least where FOIA existed. Responses came back with polite pages and blunt black bars. National technical means? Ongoing investigation. Public release would jeopardize safety. Of what no one wrote. Get this, the Cold War used the rectangle like a chessboard you can't see. The United States Air Force ran training routes that accidentally skirted the box, logging instrument drift without admitting they were logging anything. Soviet long-range aviators did the mirror, earning medals for not quite crossing lines that didn't exist on maps. Each side guessed the other had a base in the blur. Each side was wrong and comforted by it. Jeannette's blur stayed, despite newer satellites, consistent with known persistent cloud anomaly patches. Insurers started marking no-go zones in quietly shared tables, the kind brokers trade over drinks. A captain would see his premiums triple for a path that shaved 2 days, blink, and swing wide. He'd detail his crew it was ice. He'd detail himself it was math. He'd never hear the word hum. Corporate scouts circled like sharks that smell iron. A survey contractor leaked a rumor, steam fog over black bands in late melt. The post went up on a niche forum, lasted 12 hours and died. Screenshots lived. Behind the scenes, private security contracts spiked for polar logistics, vague, fat retainers that bought planes, boats, and men who didn't ask many questions. The invoices hid behind pipeline patrols and fisheries compliance. The gear was wrong for fish. Here's where the reversal bit. Governments wanted quiet, capital wanted edge. Climate tilted the table. Thinner ice in the 2010s opened weeks nobody had before. A drone team out of Tromsø flew too far, caught a heat plume streaming through fog like breath from a sleeping animal, tagged the coordinates and posted. Their account went dark. Their drone showed up for sale in an auction lot 6 months later, bent and clean. Unknown to them across town, a university lab pulled a buoy stream that flickered with hum bands aligned to published under-ice spectra. The grad student labeled it Aurora coupling and moved on because his advisor said so. The file got renamed. The name said weather. Shipping insurers pushed back in memos that bled into the press in safer words. Changing Arctic risk profile. Dynamic hazard corridors. The phrase no one printed was, "There's a place we don't insure because we don't understand it." A broker in Copenhagen, thinning hair and short temper, told a client, "If you go there, you go bare." That ended the argument. Oil majors pretended not to see Dotson headlines in 2025 about engineered lanes under Antarctic ice. In private decks, they said analog. On calls, they said geology. Their field guys just said, "We're reading Dotson-type signatures under our leases," and waited for either budgets or subpoenas. The militaries kept the dance, but the music changed. Patrol cycles lengthened near the margins. Dull gray boats with no flags loitered where charts went gray. Satellites still blurred. FOIA still lost. One difference, coastal nations began redrawing claim lines as close to the zone as law could bear, filing notes with polite teeth. If the rectangle ever fails, the first mover wins by paperwork. Everything was about to change when a warm winter made the fog lift and a path appeared like a dare. Opportunists were ready. They always are. The break, modern breach, and new players. It started with a winter that didn't stick. Late in the 2010s, melt lines bit deeper, and fog pulled back like a curtain on a stage no one meant to build. Black bands appeared where there should have been white, long stripes breathing steam that drifted and stitched itself shut again by dusk. From a ridge, two grad kids flying a fixed-wing drone caught a plume, hot air pumping through rime like a lung. They posted a clip with coordinates. 12 hours later, the post was gone. Their advisor called it ice dynamics and told them to finish their degrees. Get this, their clip didn't die, it migrated. A forum full of ship spotters mirrored the video, slowed it down, and noticed something ugly. The steam didn't billow like a crack vent. It pulsed even in counts that matched known under-ice hum bands. Someone overlaid a spectrogram and got a ladder 1, 2, 3 like the mid-century spike, only now at the surface. The thread lit up, then cooled when accounts started going quiet. Not bands, ghosting. While that was happening in the noise, a research buoy drifted wrong. It slipped a mooring line during a storm and rode the current into the rectangle's lip. The feed back home looked fine until it was. Temperature climbed in tidy steps, then plateaued just shy of what would cook electronics. The accelerometer logged a soft, repeating shove sideways like the buoy had found a current that wasn't water. Then the audio came through, not a shout, a floor. A low-band hum stacked in chords that matched published spectra from under-ice work people do on glaciers and shelves. The lab tech who pulled the file labeled it Aurora coupling and archived it. He was told to. Private money didn't wait for permission. Invoices popped for polar logistics, big fat blocks that bought tilt rotors, enclosed sleds, radar and suitcases, and men with beards who didn't wear patches. A Norwegian firm no one had heard of hired ex-military pilots on short contracts and flew weather runs that brushed the box at dawn and dusk. The pilots came back tight-lipped, which is a tell. One of them told a bartender, "It's warm where it shouldn't be," and then stopped talking. Coastal nations read the room. Claims maps crept like ivy, hugging legal lines as close to the rectangle as treaties allowed. Notes were filed in polite language about extended continental shelves and resource management. The quotes in the press said research, ecology, stewardship. The drafts in back rooms said proximity, leverage, first mover. This was the dot that brokers already redlined. The governments wanted it under their thumb without saying why. Then Dotson blew up the quiet. In early 2025, reports from Antarctica described long, straight lanes under the Dotson Ice Shelf, geometry many called engineered because natural processes don't like straight, stable corridors under moving ice. Not everyone agrees on the word, but the signatures are real. To the public, it was a strange Antarctic story. Inside certain circles, it was a mirror. The intake slope we'd mapped in the north, the one with teeth for microfracture ice, the spiral sediment sorting, suddenly had a cousin on the other pole. A shipping exec not paid to believe in anything but ports forwarded the Dotson paper with one line, "Find me this up north." He wasn't the only one. A micro story from a man who never wanted his name said out loud. He was working a tender for a fisheries patrol, which was already a joke, when his thermal camera painted a ribbon across the fog, 30 meters wide, steady warm, no vessel, no flares. He marked the edge with a buoy. 30 hours later, the buoy had moved east against wind and current models. He pulled it. He kept the chip. That night, a woman in a plain coat bought him dinner and his future silence. He kept the chip anyway. People do. Meanwhile, satellites did their dance. High-raised birds sharpened the world and still missed the rectangle. Tiles misaligned. Clouds froze in place. A graduate in cartography made a pretty map of persistent cloud cover anomalies, and a red band ran right over the Jeannette Island blur like a bad joke. Her professor called it an artifact. She laughed and didn't. Insurance bent first, because money sees shape before policy admits it. Underwriters rewrote exclusions in language that sounded like frostbite and read like, "If your course thread this needle, we won't pay when you get cut." Captains adjusted. A corridor opened in practice, if not on paper, ships swinging wide around a place that travel time math said they should cut through, but rumor and new warm lanes suggested they should avoid because it felt alive. Here's the pressure point. A private consortium, mix of hedge money and tech swagger, pitched a neutral survey. No flags, just data. They held it in a hotel ballroom with thick carpet and bad lighting, said transparency 30 times and pointed at the upside. If the zone hides passive heat channels, we can shave days off northern routes without cracking ice. Green shipping, they said, and meant profit. In the Q&A, an old polar hand asked about the hum. The panel smiled like they'd rehearsed not knowing. Unknown to them across town, an intelligence memo hit 3 inboxes with a sentence that was short enough to memorize. Active unknown infrastructure likely present. Not confirmed. Not ours, but likely. The memo attached a graph, hum bands bending in sync across 2 buoys 40 nautical miles apart. Someone had pressed a button or the machine had rolled a new cycle. The title on the memo said seasonal variance. The men who read it knew better. A drone team out of Reykjavik tried again. This time they flew low over black water where a lead had opened early and found not just heat but texture, ripples on the surface that marched regular as if a conveyor below was stepping. They posted stills. Their server choked. A partner called to say the account was flagged for maritime safety misinformation. They laughed because that's what you do when the words don't fit the world you saw. The false ending came like a lullaby. Press lines went out that the zone had stabilized. Winter returned, ice closed, hazard notices renewed. Agencies pointed to fresh imagery, grainy, clean, boring. Reporters moved on to fish stocks and shipping lanes and feel-good stories about polar bear corridors and green tech. A glossy press kit had a polar bear on the cover and words about stewardship. The Jeannette Island blind spot didn't earn a footnote. Trust me, it wasn't quiet. Behind the scenes, the vault opened a second way, and the people who knew felt the calendar slide under their feet. All quiet up north. Officially, it wrapped up neat. Agencies put out lines that sounded like weather. The zone stabilized. Winter set hard. Hazard notices renewed, the same dry language, the same coordinates nobody printed big. Flight safety, magnetic disturbance, ice dynamics. Reporters nodded because that's how you exit a story without admitting there was one. Media flipped to friendlier ice. Shipping lanes opening, ports racing to modernize, fish stocks drifting north like a slow parade. Interviews on cod quotas and trawl nets, cheerful maps with arrows and pastel gradients. A neat press kit landed in inboxes, polar bears on the cover, a clean typeface, green tech slogans about cleaner routes, fewer emissions, safer skies. The blind spot near Jeannette Island didn't rate a caption. It never does. Trust me, everything about it felt tidy by design. Photographs cut just wide enough to miss the edges. Satellite frames picked for calm seas and even light. A little blur here, a persistent but totally normal cloud there. A stack of routine reissuance, memos tied hazard loops into habit. People stopped asking because they were being fed answers to a different set of questions. If you've ever watched misdirection up close, you know the trick. Fill the hand with something cute while the other hand hides the blade. In boardrooms, the line hardened. Nothing anomalous detected. Monitoring continues. Stakeholders aligned. If you said hum, you got a smile. If you said engineered, you got a frown and a reminder about professional vocabulary. The consortium that had pitched neutral survey posted a slideshow with new diagrams that showed safe corridors nowhere near the rectangle. They said transparency 3 more times. Investors clapped without looking down. Micro story because these are the seams where truth leaks. A meteorologist at a coastal agency cued a buoy update and watched the temperature trace flat. It had been climbing in clean steps for a week. Now it was level, workbook straight. He muttered, scrolled, and caught the tail end of a glitch, a tiny rise, almost insultingly small on a node just east. He flagged it and got back a note, known artifact. He closed the tab and stared at the wall. He knew what artifacts looked like. This one had a pulse. Meanwhile, the men who'd flown those weather arcs came home early and quiet. They signed fresh NDAs and didn't drink where they used to. A pilot who'd talked too much kept his mouth shut. The tender captain who'd sold his chip kept it closer. People with nothing to say usually have the most to forget. So yeah, all quiet up north. Nice, tidy filed. The lullaby worked on almost everyone. It didn't work on the ice. Behind the scenes, a vault opened a second way, not where anyone had been watching, not at the clean hex gate that ate light, but under the skin, down a slope the maps called Meltwater. And the place that hummed started drawing breath sideways. The second door, Subglacial intake route. 3 weeks after the lull, Meltwater scans started misbehaving on the edge. A team running ground-penetrating radar along what should have been boring blue ice watched the return fatten into a smooth, sloped void. Not a crevasse, not a moulin, a tube, long, even grade, hugging a vector that pulled toward the warm core we'd already traced by inference. They flagged it as drainage. Then they walked its line for a mile and the shape didn't change. Drainage meanders. This was the straight hand of a plan. They lowered a small sled with a camera and a cheap sonar head. Nothing invasive, just look and listen. The sled slid like it had been invited. The walls flashed and resolved into broad ribs, not the fine bellows of the corridor, but heavy, widely spaced teeth. Intake teeth. At first, a glaciologist said ogive bands, the pretty wave patterns ice makes under stress. Then the camera caught scallops ground into each tooth face, microfracture catchers, tuned to grab ice crystals, not fish, to grip by grain size and let go at the right shear. You don't carve that by accident. Sediment appeared in the sled's light, fines in thin spirals dusting channels, heavies caged in little pits that marched the wall. A tech scraped a sample and it sorted itself as it moved, fines racing ahead in tight, laminar sheets while coarse grit died into pockets like someone had designed drag by density. Flow math on a legal pad said it out loud. This tube isn't draining, it's processing. Look, this is going to sound crazy, but the tube behaved like a throat. The grade was kind to flow. The cross-section bulged and pinched where you'd put throttles if you wanted to regulate without valves. And every 10 meters or so, just out of sight of one rib, the sonar saw a shallow recess, a pocket that would break eddies and hand them back calmed. Baffles, not caves. The team pushed the sled deeper until the cable groaned. Temperature rose, then steadied below boil but above comfort, right where you'd want ice to soften without flashing to vapor. The hydrophone picked up the house tone, the hum band we knew sitting there like a floor, and then a higher whisper, a secondary rhythm synced to the ripples marching along the wall. Those ripples lined up to Polignaz on the surface if you tracked them far enough out. Waste heat leaving by design again. Here S where the old Dotson paper from 2025 stopped being a headline and became a key. Those Antarctic engineered lanes had the same sloped geometry, the same density sorting etched in geology that claimed not to have hands. People pretended to fight over words in journals. In rooms without microphones, they said match. This wasn't a doppelganger, it was family. The intake teeth weren't built for animals. They had bite at human shin height, human hip height, human shoulder height, but the gaps didn't care about backs or bellies. They cared about fracture planes. Run a block of sea ice through those teeth and it would go from slab to shot with almost no energy wasted. Feed that into corridors that never quite echo, around a core that breaths waste heat into the sea in clean lines, and you've got a loop. Ice in, energy and flow out. Risk managed, failure caught before it becomes cascade. Sediment spirals told time. Layers by micron, rings by storm, swirls by season. The curves didn't shout years, they murmured centuries. A patient geochemist pulled ratios and blinked when the clock pointed past our empires. The tube had been running while we were still telling ourselves the Arctic was empty white. So what's the job? That's the question that kills sleep. If it's a plant, what does it plant? If it's a mill, what is it grinding besides ice and grit? The simplest read is also the rudest. It processes the Arctic itself. It takes in phase transitions, solid to liquid to vapor, and makes them behave on a schedule, not a whim. That means shipping lanes where you couldn't force them with breakers. It means Polignaz that never freeze, not because of wind or salt, but because a machine bleeds heat with intent. It means currents tuned a hair this way, a hair that cumulative moves fish, storms, and the arithmetic of ports. A micro story from the sled team. The operator, a woman who'd spent enough nights with ice to not romanticize it, brushed the wall with the sled's nose on a turn. The teeth flexed, not much, just enough to keep the sled from biting a corner. Push against a glacier and it cleaves you. Push here and it forgives at the exact right pound. The note she wrote was dry, compliant edge behavior, but her voice when she told it later said awe. Meanwhile, the surface started sketching the intake's map in faint fog. On still mornings, a ribbon of steam drew lines above the buried tube, drifting in patient pulses that matched the whisper in the hydrophone. A fisherman who had no business being there watched from too near the line and swore the sea was breathing, as if a lung had been put under the floorboards. Flow math made a brutal promise. A device that can pull that much mass energy through itself without seizing is either going to be the safest thing in the ocean, because it never shocks, or the most dangerous, because if it hiccups on the wrong beat, you get a shelf crack that talks to tides for 1,000 miles. That's why the second door matters. Corridors are a visit. Intakes are an appetite. And now the meaning that no one wants on paper. If this is a machine, someone built it to do a job. Maybe not for us. Maybe not even during any chapter we wrote down, but a job still. And jobs this big don't run without purpose. The second door isn't an exit, it's a reveal. The vault we thought was solid isn't a room, it's a system with a mouth that opens under our feet. The builders, human, prehuman, or non-human. Are you sitting down? Because this is the part everyone argues. 3 doors, lost human industry, something prehuman that wore our planet before us, or non-human, an intelligence that isn't us at all. We'll walk each and keep the floor under our feet. Facts where we have them, theory where we don't. No romance, just what the site forces us to consider. Start with us, human. There's a clean appeal to it, mystery solved by ancestors. The 1940s had thermal drills, sure. Wartime metallurgy was sprinting. Tungsten carbides, high-nickel steels, moly blends. We know the binders, the sparks, the weights. But the curls they pulled from those ribs laughed at the catalogs. Conductive like metal, insulting like ceramic, dense, but with a weird lag in electric response. The spark test went dull, almost starless. No weld blooms, no tool chatter. If we built this, where are the scars? Layout echoes factories we recognize. Honeycomb lanes, service bulbs, intakes tuned for throughput, waste heat vented where it buys surface function. That's industrial logic. It speaks in efficiency and failure control. A machinist could stand there and feel seen, but then the pressure edges read your stance and adapt in days. The hum learns timing and holds it after the pinger dies. Our factories don't do that in secret under a polar lid with no support chain, no ore piles, no human trash. Human fits the floor plan. It breaks on the material and the behavior. Okay, prehuman. People love this one until timelines bite. Could there have been an advanced lineage before us, wiped clean by ice and water with a taste for hex and curve and a budget for centuries? The intake shows centuries of run, not millennia. Polygons aligned to present currents. Sediment spirals bracket storms we can date from ship logs. If something prehuman built it, something post-ice age tuned it. But then we crash into climate records. We don't see fingerprints for an industry like this steering seas 10,000 years back. Fish bones, middens, weird isotopes, you'd expect a wake. We don't see it. Here's where people get mad. Non-human, not us. Not our cousins. A builder that treats ice like a moving part and water like a medium. The repeating rib marks don't match known scripts. They feel like tactile logic, parameters you set with a hand, not instructions you read with eyes. The site senses presence without cameras. It nudges gate patterns into stability. It files resonance and answers a wall tap with a bent harmonic like a nod you didn't earn. Energy budget-wise, it's miserly and elegant. Bleeds heat just enough to right lanes on the sea and never wastes a surge. Trust me, you're not ready for the simplest implication. It might not care about us at all. If the job is managing phase transitions, ice to water to vapor, on a schedule that keeps a polar engine in tune, then anything stomping through the corridors is noise. The system adapts to reduce noise. We show up, it smooths our steps. We ping, it chooses a new key and waits. That's not a greeting, that's control theory. A micro story from a linguist who touched the rib marks with eyes closed. He traced 21 notches, found the nest pattern, and stopped. This isn't language, he said. It's a panel. Meaning each symbol is a knob that changes something you can't see. No alphabet, no grammar, just a set of dials a builder would know in their bones. If that's true, who were the hands? Let's be cruel to the romance and kind to the evidence. Human, metallurgy mismatch, behavior mismatch, missing mess. For human, time window wrong, environmental wake missing, but the comfort of Earth is a closed loop. Non-human, fits the pressure logic, the adaptive hum, the energy thrift, the global echo with Dotson's lanes. It's the theory that explains the most with the least apology. It's also the one with the hardest consequence. What nobody knew at the time, the builder's intent might not is how fast this question eats policy. If it's human, someone owns it and fights over salvage law begin. If it's prehuman, museums and myths rush in and we bury it under memory. If it's non-human, every red line gets teeth, because a machine that can feel you arriving can feel a fleet. Now mark this as theory, not gospel. No quotes, no leaps dressed as proof. We tie what we can to anchors we trust. Jeannette Island's blur shadows the box. Subglacial hum bands match what we logged in the bulb. The intake's teeth rhyme with Dotson's engineered lanes. Waste heat draws polygons that mariners have called persistent for decades. The unknown alloy refuses our catalogs with the quiet of a fact. Everything else, who, why, when, lives in the space between ribs. So choose your builder and watch what it does to your gut. Human flirts with pride, then trips on evidence. Prehuman flatters our hunger for lost chapters, then stalls on clocks. Non-human sounds like a movie until you stand in a corridor that breathes and feel it ignore your awe. Once you see this, there's no going back. The site doesn't care about our labels. It does its job. The only question left is how we do ours when the builder isn't in the room to ask. Stakes escalate, ownership, risk, and breakage. So here's the knife edge. If this is a power plant, do you switch it off? Sounds neat until you sketch the fallout. Those waste heat veins keep Polonyas open. Shut them and shipping lanes slam shut. Ice thickens wrong, storms pivot. Leave them and you're letting an unknown grid nudge oceans you don't control. Every lever here has two bad ends. If it's a mine, what's it mining? Heat, minerals, data? Heat is obvious, you can see its handwriting on the sea. Minerals, less so. The intake pulls grit and sorts it like a jeweler with infinite patience. Maybe it's harvesting trace elements in amounts that only make sense over centuries. Data is the one that keeps spooks awake. Those pressure edges red stance, time, rhythm. The hum shifts like a feedback loop. If the system logs phase transitions, ice rheology, and yes, intruders, then the Arctic's not just being shaped. It's being measured by something older and calmer than us. Accident risk is where the room stops arguing. Hum phase could crack a shelf. We watched it ripple under our boots when a polite ping stacked harmonics and the ice answered like water. If a careless probe or a corporate test bumps the wrong mode, you don't get a broken machine, you get a basin scale event. A shelf sags, a lead tears open to the wrong depth, tides grab the scar, and coastal towns 2,000 miles away watch flood maps come true. Subglacial hum correlates with surface warp events. That's not doom talk, that's the logbook. Ownership is a lit fuse. The treaty collapses the second a bit spins inside that box under one flag. Non-occupation, non-navigation, non-drilling worked when the ice was a lock and satellites were dumb. Now a hedge fund can hire a survey ship with a submersible and call it fisheries compliance. The first borehole that noses past the seam into that warm grid will trigger a dozen governments and 5 companies to claim salvage law, heritage law, maritime jurisdiction, extended shelf, exclusive economic zone. Paper becomes war with nicer shoes. And the military risk? A machine that senses presence is a weapon risk before you even talk lasers and hull cutters. You don't need guns if you can make a lane open or close on a timing that strands fleets. You don't need missiles if you can flex currents so a carrier group crawls while a leaner boat slips through calm. If the system can file patterns, it can learn signatures. If it can learn signatures, it can discriminate. Now add jammers, decoys, drones. None of it matters if the floor under you belongs to a patient control loop. This turns anti-submarine warfare into argue with the floor. People will still argue profit. A route that cuts 7 days off Asia, Atlantic turns port maps and supply chains inside out. Insurers will price risk to the ragged edge, then step back the second a buoy logs a hum bend. Fish stocks will surge where Polonyas write heat for longer, then crash when the phase shifts. Treaties over quotas will tear because fish don't honor lines and neither do corridors that hum. Every harbor master from Murmansk to Dutch harbor will redraw dredge schedules to chase a variable that isn't weather anymore. A micro story from a port call. A shipmaster ran a gamble through a warm lane in late season, shaved 40 hours, made his window, bragged in port. A week later, same line, same lane, the hum drifted and the ribbon closed. He parked on the wrong side of a fresh lid for 9 days and watched his profit die by 1,000 emails. He doesn't believe in machines under ice. He believes in invoices. He won't run that cut again. Legal fixes sound soft until you see the teeth. You can write joint control regimes and neutral inspectors, sure. You can register the rectangle as protected under environmental frameworks. But the moment someone proves economic value, heat routing, mineral capture, even green shipping, the carve-outs start. Limited scientific exploitation, pilot corridors, emergency access for safety. Every exception is a crowbar. So what do? You define a red line tied to physics, not flags. No active probing inside the grid. No mechanical contact with seams or intakes. No powered vehicles within a buffer set by hum amplitude, not convenience. You place buoys that listen, not knock. You publish spectra in the open so any spike becomes a public tripwire, not a private advantage. You make silence a shared rule, not a secret. Because here's the twist everyone misses. Someone already pressed the button, not a big cinematic lever. A small nudge, a timed ping, a presence pattern that taught the system one new curve. The proof is in the tails, the hum that held a key after the pinger died, the new Pologna that opened east when graphs looked clean. The conveyor ripples a drone caught where water should have been still. Breakage isn't a myth out here. It's a ledger entry waiting for a date. Ownership, risk, breakage, they're the same story told by different accountants. The builder isn't in the room, we are. And the machine under the ice doesn't care what flag you fly when you wake it. We deactivated it. A week after the second door, a letterhead memo landed like a sedative. Safe shutdown sequence completed. Graphs attached, clean lines, tidy slopes, hum amplitude trending to baseline. The subject line did half the work. Stabilization protocol achieved. People in rooms with windows exhaled. The word deactivated started showing up in calls like it had always belonged there. Look, I'm gonna tell you something. The plots were pretty because they were meant to be looked at fast. The main band fell short. The harmonics trimmed down like nails before a board meeting. But if you let your eye run to the right edge, the tail, you saw it. A faint lift in a sister frequency, east by a handful of nautical miles. The press kit didn't include that axis. The tech who caught it printed the page and stuck it under a folder like a guilty secret. They rolled out the theater. A joint presser with neutral flags, experts in cautious ties, the kind of stagecraft that says, steady hands, calm seas. They showed thermal maps that looked boring. They said routine. They promised continued monitoring. A reporter asked about Polognas that had opened off pattern the week before. The answer was wind and salt. The follow-up died because the room was already packing bags. Wait until you see the tale. 2 nights later, a new Pologna opened east, long, thin, less dramatic than the old vein, but crisp. Mariners flagged it in channels where men talk straight. The pattern matched the pulses that had drifted during the so-called shutdown. The plot thickens. The system hadn't gone dark, it had rerouted. A micro story from a buoy tech who didn't sleep much. He set a watch on 3 edge nodes. At 02:13, one went quiet, smooth as silk, textbook off. At 02:17, the eastern pair ticked up in sync, half a degree, then held. No spike, no surge, just a hand moving a slider you couldn't see. He filed it as maintenance anomaly and went for a walk in the cold because anger needs air. The memo writers knew what they were doing. Most people want a lullaby. Markets want calm, navies want predictability, insurers want a number they can print. We deactivated it buys everyone a week of sleep, but the system's logic never cared about their words. It felt pressure, learned rhythms, moved heat along a second path, and waited to see if anyone noticed. Back channels lit. One line out of Oslo said redistribution, like heat were cargo. A phone in Washington hummed with the phrase load shedding, a power grid term smuggled into ocean talk. In Moscow, a man who'd sailed trawlers stared at a chart and said something soft about ghosts and cables. The public line held, calm achieved. The private truth was meaner. The machine chose a new lane. This wasn't off, this was reassignment. And reassignment has consequences that don't fit press time. Consequences, economics and geopolitics rewired. First, the clocks. New warm lanes cut transit times the way a smart shortcut does in a sleeping city. A container ship left Murmansk, rode a ribbon that shouldn't exist in late season, and shaved 56 hours off a run to Rotterdam. Port schedulers cheered. Then 2 weeks later, the ribbon slid east by a dozen miles, and the next ship missed the cut and parked at the lid for 4 days. Schedules went from linear to probabilistic. You can plan for ice. You can't plan for a corridor that breathes. Ports scrambled, tug bookings yo-yoed. Cranes idled on Tuesdays and ran 3 shifts on Thursdays. Warehouses burst at the seams because vessels bunched behind closures, then arrived in a rush when the lane reopened like a throat clearing. A harbor pilot in Tromsø said, "It's like someone else holds the traffic light." He was right, someone or something did. Fish stocks shifted like furniture dragged in the night. Persistent Polognas drew plankton blooms, which drew baitfish, which pulled cod and capelin under flags that hadn't seen them in decades. Treaties over quotas, already fragile, snapped. Historic catch rights meant less when the fish's new address ignored maps. Norwegian and Russian boats crowded makeshift edges. A dust-up in dull seas turned ugly when one trawler accused another of chasing the machine's line. The phrase stuck. Quota lawyers earned yachts. Oil fields under thinning ice went weird on instruments. Operators whispered about Dotson-type signatures in the north now. Thermal lanes, straight and stubborn, under leases they'd mapped as messy geology. Drill plans were paused, then unpaused with revised risk models, then paused again when a hum bend cut across a seismic transect like a mood swing. Share prices jittered in winter now, not just summer, because winter had been the safe season and winter wasn't acting safe. Insurance did the math and changed the weather. Premiums for Arctic routes started coming with hum clauses. If your course intersects an active heat lane, we reserve the right to reprice at berth. Captains called brokers with voices that sounded like grinding ice. A dry man in London said, "Sail wide or sail bare." Bankers called shipowners and asked how they felt about covenant breaches. The answer was, worse after coffee. Coastal towns looked up from tidy master plans and started panic planning. Breakwaters built for a rhythm older than diesel suddenly took blows from directions no model had promised. Ice jamming patterns flipped. Harbors froze where they shouldn't and ran open where they never had. Mayors asked central governments for money to move fuel depots upslope or dredge a new cut. Central governments said words like resilience, and then quietly asked their intelligence people if the phrase active unknown infrastructure was going to ruin a budget. It did. Intelligence memos stopped hedging. Active unknown infrastructure moved from likely to assessed with confidence in 3 capitals. That doesn't mean aliens in a headline. It means the floor under the north has a system property no one claimed and no one could switch off with a memo. Military planners quietly changed patrol patterns. Submarines prowled the new warm lanes because sound travels different in heat. Sonar models got patched weekly by kids who used to write games. Diplomacy tried to pretend this was normal. Arctic councils convened to talk shipping safety and fish. Microphones heard sentences about science and cooperation. The real room, the one with the thicker door, talked leverage. Who files the first map that names a corridor and calls it a seasonal right-of-way? Who sells green shipping on a lane kept open by waste heat from a machine they don't control? Who admits in a confidential annex that the risk of a hum-phase shelf event means no one should ever anchor near the intake, ever, no matter what flag the anchor chain carries? Corporates rebranded. Adaptive routing suites hit trade shows, software that watched hum proxies and told you when to run the cut and when to loiter. Think Waze for oceans, except the road moves because a control loop under ice moved it. Vendors didn't say machine. They said dynamic. Clients didn't ask. They rented the suite and prayed to whoever minds invoices. A micro story from a freight forwarder in Tallinn. He used to quote 30-day windows without sweat. Now he writes ranges like weathermen. He lost a client when a consignment of heart valves arrived 5 days early and sat too cold, then lost another when generator housings missed a window and a wind farm install slid a month. "It's the lanes," he says. "They're not ours." He buys another coffee and stares at a screen that redraws a route while he blinks. Meanwhile, claim lines crept. Extended continental shelf submissions packed polite language around a hard fact. Proximity is power. A quiet draft in one ministry sketched a contingent stewardship zone that would give one state emergency powers over a corridor in the name of safety. The lawyers smiled because they'd found a way to say control without writing the word own. The admirals didn't smile. They heard casus belli with adjectives. Markets hate secrets that move ships. Hedge funds built baskets that went long on ports near stable Polonya's and short on those now iced. A rumor about a shutdown protocol could swing fuel futures because a vein closing means icebreakers, and icebreakers mean time, and time is money wearing a parka. Twice in 1 month, a bland communique out of a weather office moved more value than an OPEC leak. And people, real ones, felt it small. A village with a new dock watched the thaw arrive early 3 years straight, then lost it to a rerouted lane that bled heat somewhere else. Nets came up wrong. The grocery barge missed twice and the shelves went thin. A kid in a red coat learned the word Polonya before she learned the word parliament. So yeah, economics and geopolitics didn't just bend, they rewired. Because when a map starts lying kindly and a machine under the ice writes its own routes, power moves with it. The choice now is whether to play. It's whether to admit what's keeping the game board warm. The choice, reveal, engage, or bury. So here we are at the part nobody likes because it doesn't have a hero shot. 3 doors, reveal it, engage it, or bury it. Each choice comes with a bill you can't pay later with spin. Reveal sounds honest. Turn on the lights. Show the ribbed corridors, the pressure edges, the intake teeth, the lanes that draw Polonyas like veins. Admit the hum, admit the reroute. Put Jeanette's blind patch and the blurred tiles on a big screen and say, yes, there's active unknown infrastructure under the ice and it's not ours. You get a rush of truth and then what? Panic travels faster than ships. Ports halt because insurers yank cover. Fleets idle because no admiral wants to test a machine that learns signatures. Markets swing like a boom in wind. The upside is real, though. Shared governance gets a fighting chance when no one can plausibly deny the machine exists. The first honest maps would be collective, not flags carved into fog. That's the best of reveal, hard truth that forces shared rules because no one wants to own the first mistake in daylight. Engage is the least romantic and probably the least bad. Joint lab, red lines, slow study. Not 5 nations in a smoke-filled room, open enough to tie hands, closed enough to keep amateurs from knocking on the seam. Engagement means writing rules in physics, not pride. No active probing inside the grid. No power plants piggybacked on waste heat without public tripwires. Publish spectra so any spike is a global alarm, not an internal memo. Third-party audits with teeth. Neutral teams that can walk onto a deck or up a gangway and say, "Shut that off now. It's dull. It's tense." It's the only lane where the machine gets watched by adults who prefer boredom to drama. You won't get perfect compliance. You might get a culture built around not pressing the wrong button. Bury is the move cowards make when they love the short term. Keep the rectangle quiet. Feed press kits on bears and green roots. Write NDAs long enough to choke a whale. Hope ice thickens and the hum behaves. It buys calm until it doesn't. Because melt trends don't take memos. Because private money doesn't wait when profit looks like steam in cold air. Because the intake has a second door and that door opens under systems you don't police. Bury it and the first breach won't be a nation with a flag. It'll be a consortium with a lawyer and a drone sled and a pitch deck that says pilot corridor and adaptive routing and no impact. And when they trip the wrong harmonic and a shelf warps, every minister who signed silence will wish for a time machine. Look, I'm gonna tell you where I land and you can throw it out after. Limited reveal, hard rules, external audits. You show just enough to lock the game in the open. Publish the hum bands, the Polignac alignments, the intake geometry stripped of romance. Prove the adaptive behavior in a way regular people can follow. Then you slam a frame on it. No one probes, no one drills, no one sets a powered hull within a buffer set by amplitude, not ambition. You create an independent watch that answers to the world, not a block. And you put the data where a grad kid in a small lab can see a drift and shout. And their shout matters because the spectra are public. There's one more piece. You write red lines for militaries before they write them in salt. No exercises near the margins. No decoys in the lanes. No accidental overflights or under-ice runs that ask the machine to file signatures. You treat the grid like a heart you don't understand. You don't sprint stairs when you're already dizzy. Engage also means humility that stings. We don't get to know the job yet. We get to observe the job being done and not make it worse. If we're lucky, carefully, we learn its rhythms the way sailors learn a coast, marks, not myths. If we're unlucky, we at least avoid teaching it one new bad habit. Meaning, history just got bigger, the map was never empty. The North carried a task older than our empires and steadier than our flags. We stumbled into it with boots that echo and a habit of ownership. The choice now isn't about romance, it's about stewardship without a god complex. We don't get to be the builders, we get to be the neighbors. And neighbors don't drill through a wall to see what the hum is doing. They listen. They set hours. They knock once, then stop. So we end where we started, with a lid of winter over a system that doesn't care about our labels. Reveal enough to make denial impossible. Engage with rules that survive elections. Bury nothing except pride, because the machine will keep working. The only question left is whether we can too without breaking the floor under our own feet. That hum under the ice isn't a mystery anymore. It's a boundary we have to respect before it writes our future for us. If you want the uncut spectra, the Jeannette blur receipts, the Dotson lane scans, subscribe, hit the bell, and send this to the one friend who thinks shutdown means off. Next episode, I'm playing the pinger that made the ice ripple.